So our stone pathway is in, and I thought it would be worthwhile to go over some of the plants that we're planting in between and around the paving stones. And part of the reason for that is even though the gaps within the paving stones are not that large, chances are something is going to plant itself within those barren areas, and you'd rather want to plant something that you would want in there, whether it's by seed or whether it's by plug, because nature abhors a vacuum. Now, I'm not going to go over an extensive list of plants that you could plant between paving stones. I'm just merely going to introduce you to some of the plants that we're going to be planting within our paving stones. And there are certain times that are perfect for pavers. Now, not all times are actually good for paving stones, but some of the ones that I actually have here, this one is called Annie Hall, and this is a time that gets only about this height, and it actually has this nice spreading habit. So what we're gonna see here, like this, there's an inchworm right there as well, just inching along. This one is a plug that I plugged in. I was using basically a toothpick to get in between these very thin gaps here. And so probably within a year or two, it's going to just start to expand and spread and just soften the edge of these stones. The other one that I have is not as green as the Annie Hall, but this one is Thymus Leprechaun. And you can see that it has this, it's a very small plug. Let me see if I could pull one of these out. Sometimes if these plugs don't pull out, you could poke the bottom of them with a stick, or I don't have my utensils here, but here we go. This is a small plug. So I mentioned plugs in one of the earlier episodes not too long ago. And this is an example of plugs that come in 128 tray. So these are very, very tiny. I mean, these are less than a quarter size. And I prefer these when I'm planting in between pavers, especially something that looks this thin and is this thin. Sometimes I will plant thyme along the edges, but they aren't usually the ones that spread very close and prostrate to the ground. Here's another one that I like to plant. It's called Elfin thyme, and this grows to about a quarter inch to almost an inch. And this has a bit more, I found, a mounding habit. So if you have a curved stone, this curves very nicely over the stone and is actually very dense, and as you can see, has these very, very tiny leaflets. I think that this is probably the variety that has the tiniest leaves. Now, some of the other ones I'm going to show you are slightly higher, so they're not like a quarter inch to an inch, but they might actually be an inch to 2 inches, all the way up to 6 inches. And I don't think that these would be best for paving stones, because if you're walking and you're walking kind of flat to the ground, chances are you're going to trip over the thyme. Whereas this, you could actually stand on top of it and step on it, and it actually could withstand some light foot traffic. This is a variety called coconut thyme, and this is an example of one that gets to be about 4 inches. So I'm planting the coconut thyme more towards the edges of the path, so it really will direct folks away from stepping on the edges of the path and into the garden beds. And even though this one has a funky name of coconut thyme, it doesn't smell like coconuts. There's also one called mint thyme, which I'll show you, which doesn't smell like mint at all. There are some thymes that do have a scent, especially the ones that are used for culinary purposes, but these aren't usually the ones that are used for culinary purposes. This is Reiter's thyme, and this is 1 to 2 inches high, so this doesn't grow too high. I would definitely use this as maybe a paving stone or just along the edges, because again, you know, you could imagine planting one that goes 2 inches high, and then even one behind it that goes 4 inches high, and another one that goes behind it that's more 6 inches high. And the benefit of planting multiple different types of thyme, even though they might have similar leaf structure, is that oftentimes they're blooming at different times of the season, which is pretty cool, because then you could actually have these continuous blooms for like 2 or 3 months. This is a culinary one. This is called Pennsylvania Dutch tea thyme, and this is 1 inch high to 2 inches high, and you could see that it has a bit more of a upright habit, but then it kind of slowly grows down to the ground. So that's another great example. And then I'm going to be planting this up in the herb garden, but also close to the walking path so that it gives some continuity with the thyme planted along the edges. Here's another one. It has a really funny name. It's called Loveyanus thyme. And this is also used as a ground cover, but it grows to about 3 to 6 inches high. And so again, this is something that I would not plant definitely within the paver, but kind of around the edging of the pavers. Doone Valley thyme is one of my favorites. I actually already have this planted in the herb garden. This gets to about 4 inches high. And this is an example of one that does have a scent. So this is a bit more lemon scented. I found that it's hardy to this zone. It says usually it's hardy to zone 6, but given within the bed, and if you mulch it good enough and you have it, more in a southern aspect, this one actually will survive. I had mentioned the coconut thyme before, and this is mint thyme. And this is a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. This is another great example of a thyme that would plant very well within the pavers. I wanted to get this within the 128, so the smaller version of the trays, but unfortunately the company that was growing these didn't really have the smaller ones. So this one I could stand to plant very close, and I'll plant those usually in between the pavers here that have larger gaps. This is another one called Caraway thyme, and this is another one that would be used for culinary purposes. So it does have a caraway flavor, and it gets about 4 inches high. So this would be something that I'd plant on the edge of the walk path in the herb garden. The last 2 thymes that I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to show you 2 other types of plants that I'm planting in with the pavers. This one I'm planting in the memorial garden, and it's called silver needle thyme. And just take a close look at some of those leaves. They're so different and so unique. Usually thyme has that very traditional thyme-looking leaf, and it's very boring, but this one happens to have a very cool needle-like leaf. Part of the reason why I'm growing this in the memorial garden is because it has that silver look like the Abies fir that is growing above it and all the conifers that are around there. So I thought that was a really interesting one to show you. It only grows about 1 inch high, and then it starts to spread. Juniper thyme is another great example. This is a thyme that's pretty flavorful, so you could actually use it for culinary purposes. This grows a bit more like 6 inches, so it's like a little miniature tree. I mean, look at this, it's like a little bonsai. It's so cool. So I've actually planted this in the memorial garden, and you could see with this upright habit, you wouldn't necessarily be planting it between paver stones because you'd probably trample it and hit it with your foot. Now, 2 of the other plants that are more culinary and herbal in nature, but actually grow a bit more close to the ground, so these are more prostrate. This is called Mounding Marjoram, and it's totally fragrant. And what I like about fragrant ground covers, again, like I said, not all thyme is fragrant, but what I like about fragrant ground covers is that as you step over them, you'll get a little whiff of that smell, and I think that's so cool. So this one grows to about 3 inches, and I'm actually planting it within the pavers in the back that have the larger gaps. And much like that one, this is called creeping oregano, and this one grows a little bit higher, like 6 inches, so I'm kind of planting that along the edges of the pavers. And this is another great example of a pretty attractive ground cover that also has a great scent. So that is the suite of plants that I am planting around the walk path and the footpath here. I don't think they're going to look like much this year, considering that I'm planting in fall, but next year I'm definitely convinced that they're going to take off because I've already started planting these in other garden beds, and I absolutely love how quickly that they spread.
Your viewership and support of the channel goes a long way. We commit 10% of our Google AdSense revenues back to great community projects in the Finger Lakes community, which is matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So it's just another way to help build strength and support within the community by the community. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.